Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to be talking about the total solar eclipse on April the 8th, and of course, a lot of other fascinating things that are happening at the time, my kind of take on things globally, and of course, going through things sign by sign. And before I begin, I usually end like this, sort of thanking all of you for subscribing to my channel and also sending me such wonderful comments. And actually, it's because of your comments, it reminds me of things that I probably need to make a little bit clearer, which, as you'll see, I'm going to be doing a little bit later on along this video. And the other thing, I think, is that a lot of people who are joining the channel and are sort of, testing the water a little bit with astrology, know quite a lot, but, still feeling their way. I've got a book called The Astrology Handbook, The Art of Interpretation, which breaks things down very, very easily for you. So all of that over, let's get into it. Well, this solar eclipse is the first solar eclipse of the year, but it's also, it's the second eclipse of the year. We had a lunar eclipse on March the 25th, which is the subject of a video before this. But this is a total solar eclipse, and they're always spectacular. Day turns to night, and it's quite dramatic as the moon's shadow, or the moon, comes between the Earth and the sun. And on this occasion, because the moon is so close to the Earth, its diameter is even bigger, which is why we get this total solar eclipse. It will be completely dark in certain areas of the world. Now, it's called the Great American Eclipse or the Great North American Eclipse for good reason, because that's where you'll get the full effect. In fact, there's a whole little track between Texas and Maine, and if you do that in a sort of northwesterly route, you will get the maximum effect of that eclipse. But yes, you'll get it in other parts of the world, but it just won't be quite as dramatic as that. Now, the eclipse takes place on the 8th of April at 1922 GMT UTC, which of course you'll need to make the adjustment for, depending where you are in the world. But as I've just said, in North America, you're going to see it really dramatically. And that's because it's going to be sort of noon, lunchtime. And so the sun is at its highest point, and therefore you're going to get this maximum effect. Now, this time I'm also going to mention something, I think I might have mentioned it last year on another of my eclipse videos, is that it's part of a Saros cycle, and that's a cycle of eclipses on the same sort of axis, but to make it kind of simple. And there may be at least over 70 of them, 90 in some cases, and they take the period of centuries to really go through. And so this particular eclipse is on the Saros cycle, or is part of the Saros cycle 139, which is kind of significant. And I'm going to talk about that shortly. Now, the Babylonians gave us the Saros cycle. They were the first to discover and plot that cycle. And the Babylonians weren't just great mathematicians and sky watchers, but they were also kind of mystics, or they had mystical beliefs as well, hence the whole idea of the wise men finding the star in the east and traveling towards it. They were almost certainly these Babylonian mathematicians and astronomers, but also mystics. And it was thought around that time through observation, and we're not talking about necessarily observing the celestial movements so much as the events that tended to happen around the eclipses. They came to associate them with the really important events of the day. And in fact, lunar eclipses in particular were associated with a lunar eclipse, which of course we had a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things they did was to avoid that prediction coming true, was to, the king abdicated for a little while before and after the eclipse, so that he wouldn't be on the throne at the time the eclipse was there, therefore denying the fulfillment of the prediction. which is kind of interesting when you think that our King Charles III was crowned on a lunar eclipse, and I'll return to that shortly, but I just wanted to pop this in right now because I think, we get such a lot by looking backwards when we go back to our ancient roots, thousands upon thousands of years ago. And imagine that these mathematicians are plotting the movements of the planets and the celestial sphere, if you like, and they're using mathematical devices, whereas now, of course, and over the centuries, we've developed telescopes and all sorts of things that give us very, very exact, calculations. But the Babylonians were only a hair out, and they had no telescope. So I always think that's fascinating. And by the way, to come back to the idea of why, through observation, the Babylonians would look at what events happened around the eclipse and why they then associated them with such fateful developments, was that in a way, these kind of celestial phenomena were considered to be the hand of God, or rather the hands of the gods at that time. So we've inherited a lot of that kind of belief, even though we've modernized things and we have a different kind of attitude, not so fatalistic when it comes to looking at eclipses. Now, to get some idea of the Saros, goodness, I can't say my S's, the Saros series 139. I just want to look at the chart of the beginning of that, and I'm going to take you all the way back to 1501, which was the first eclipse on this Saros cycle. So here it is as we look at it now. Of course, in those days, in the 16th century, they didn't know about Neptune or Uranus or Pluto. I think it's quite interesting that that in this horoscope, we have Neptune kind of close to the midheaven and Pluto on the descendant. And when I go through some of the events that made 1501 so extremely significant, we could see just how much easier it would have been to prove or to suggest that this year was going to be monumental in some regard, by the use of these planets. But I'll come to that shortly. Let me sort of take you through what we're looking at here. The other point to remember is, yes, it was the 17th of May, but as you'll see, this chart puts the sun and the moon in Gemini. And that's because we have to make an adjustment of 10 days. The Julian calendar, which was alive and well up to the 16th century, and end of the 15th century, 1500s, it was shown to be about 10 days out. So the adjustment made by Pope Gregory meant that it became the Gregorian calendar, which is what we use today. So let me tell you a little bit about why that year was so significant, 1501. And in fact, there was another eclipse towards the end of the year. That was in, let me just get this out here. That was in the sign of Libra, and that is almost as significant, especially in reference to what I'm going to be showing you about the current solar eclipse. But let me just get you through some of the really important event of 1501. Prince Arthur, who was the heir to the throne, died suddenly in November of 1501, which meant his brother, Prince Henry, became heir to the throne. He didn't take over the throne for a few more years, but what was significant about that was that Arthur was married to Catherine of Aragon, and when Arthur died, Henry married his widow. So it's kind of interesting. This whole eclipse cycle, the Saros cycle 139, began with a really important royal development. I mean, had Prince Arthur not died suddenly and unexpectedly, we'd have had a whole different kind of royal family tree, but that's not what happened. And King Henry VIII, one of the most colourful and important kings of the centuries, we're talking about the British monarchy, of course. I mean, there, just by chance, with the death of Arthur, he became King Henry VIII. I want to show you just quite quickly the chart of the solar eclipse that preceded Arthur's death. And, you know, in my videos, I often talk about the day of something isn't always the day the big event happens, but its signature is on the events that are to follow. And sometimes we can see that when an event happens and the chart itself is unfolded, we can see the signature of that eclipse by the midheaven or the ascendant or something else in that chart. But what's so interesting about this particular chart, and I'll show that to you right now, is, as you can see, the sun and moon, the solar eclipse at 28 of Libra. Why I'm showing you this is principally because if you look in the 8th house of this chart, which is around the 2 o'clock position in the circle, you'll see that Mars and Saturn are conjunct. And I find that interesting too, in light of the solar eclipse that will be taking place on the 8th of April, because Mars and Saturn are also in the mix. And I'm going to take you through that when we look at the chart in a moment. But I just wanted to show you, I love the way history repeats itself. I love to look back in time and see these events which we know about now through history and see them written in the stars. And therefore we can look at the situation that we have now with the similar charts of the times we live in and see how, you know, then we can start to make predictions, or at least play around with the various scenarios that might come around out of those. Coming to the present day and looking at this April the 8th eclipse, what makes this eclipse even more interesting? I'm not saying that what I'm about to tell you is going to affect the quality of the eclipse and the things that happen around that time, what it's portending, but it's very well worth making a note of it, because on the day of the eclipse, we will be able to see a comet, and the name of this comet, I have to read it because it just confounds me every time. It's called 12P Pons Brooks. Okay, that's what the comet is called. It's not called, it's not a very colorful title, is it? Except it has a nickname, and the nickname for this comet is the Devil. And the reason why it's got its nickname is because as you look at the comet, you know, going through the atmosphere, it's got 2 streams of vapor at its head, and it looks like a pair of horns. So I'm just mentioning this because certainly if you're interested and you're a sky watcher, you love to see the things going on in their reality, you will be able to see this comet at the time of this solar eclipse. This is the way you'll be able to see it. And it's coming closest to the Earth than it has for 71 years. In fact, the cycle of this comet is 71 years. It last came across our skies, so to speak, in 1954. And what is also interesting about this and synchronistic is that in about, well, it depends when you're watching this video, but on the 20th, 21st of April, some like 10 days or so, less than that, after the solar eclipse, we have a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. Now, I'm going to be doing a whole separate video on the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, but the interesting thing is that as we have this comet reappearing in our skies after 71 years and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus, 71 years ago, in 1954, there was a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Cancer. In fact, I think some of you watching this video will know that because you've got that brilliant conjunction in your own natal chart. So there's a lot I'm going to say about this, but I just find that very interesting that all these things are happening around the time of an eclipse. And you know, I want to be a kind of real astrologer, feet on the ground, not getting caught up in, you know, fantasies and all sorts of spooky kind of things. I'm not like that as a person, and I'm not like that as an astrologer. I like the astrology to speak for itself. But I do most certainly think that synchronicities are important, as we've all had synchronicities in our lives, whether it's we've just been talking about somebody. I mean, this happened to me only the other day in a car, talking about a dear friend of mine, and we were driving the car, and a car overtook us, and the car registration plate was her name, not the, you know, the surname as well, but just the first name. That's a synchronicity, and I knew it was significant, and well, you know, and so on and so on. So I think the idea of a comet and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction taking us back to 1954, and some of the events that may have been around at that time might also be of significance. One thing that I remember really about 1954, I don't remember it personally, but when I looked and saw what was happening, we had A Star is Born, the remake of A Star is Born with Judy Garland. And I thought, oh, isn't that perfect for a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction? It was the first testing of the atom bomb. That was also very important. And there were quite a few things at that time that were very, very revolutionary, which is why when we come to really talk about the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, it is a very revolutionary kind of aspect. But also happening, we're in the wake of that now. We're approaching that. It's coloring the solar eclipse, which is why I was able to say in my Friday Bite a couple of weeks ago, there are shocks and surprises to come. And that was actually in reference to Princess Catherine and actually also Prince William, because of the connections the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse were making to both their charts. But the idea of synchronicities again, and I don't want to get sort of gloomy and doomy here, but it was just fascinating that I referred to King Charles being crowned on a lunar eclipse. And of course, I've said this before on the lunar eclipse video, that I didn't think it was very auspicious. And going by the Babylonians, my ancestors, it's never a good idea to do anything to do with the monarchy in terms of keeping the throne on a lunar eclipse. So what was interesting about that day, and it was a beautiful day and a beautiful ceremony, and King Charles, of course, has you know, grown in popularity since the coronation last year. But you may remember that there was a moment in that ceremony, in the coronation, when we look back at the door of the cathedral, and scurrying across the back of it was this figure that looked exactly like the Grim Reaper. It was just walking, scurrying across the cathedral door. Now, it turned out it was just simply a verger who was moving from one place to the other, but he had a large kind of pole on his shoulder. You see, I would look at that as a synchronicity and think, this is not boding well. This is another synchronicity I'm not 100% sure I like the look of. And even though so far King Charles's reign has been a popular one, certainly in recent times, since January of this year, there have been some very, very difficult events that have really caused, obviously, a great deal of concern to the royal family itself, and those of us who love the royal family, it's caused us concern as well. So the idea that there's a comet happening at the same time as this solar eclipse, and the approach of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, my goodness, we are not going to be prepared for all the things that are going to happen on the global stage. But before I actually take a look at the chart of this solar eclipse, I want to go back to another eclipse in the August of 2017, 21st of August 2017. Now, that was also called the Great American eclipse. Now, it wasn't on the Saros cycle that we're looking at right now, but nevertheless, it was a very powerful event. And I thought we would look very briefly at the sort of significant events that were happening at that time. And I think in reference to things to do with the royal family, the Duke of Edinburgh retired in the August of that year, so just prior to the solar eclipse. A couple of weeks before that, a few weeks before that, Prince Harry claimed in an article in Newsweek that no one in the royal family wanted to be king or queen. It was a job considered a kind of one's ineluctable fate. So that came out just before that particular eclipse. And then within about 2 months of the eclipse, so still with that in its sights, and we can look back and see the event itself and see the signature of that eclipse in the moment that this happened, Harry and Meghan announced their engagement. So while we're still on a bit of a royal theme here, a royal roll, I want to point out these significant events on that great American eclipse. But also, I think what was interesting is that not long after that solar eclipse, then we also had Donald Trump officially making Jerusalem the capital of Israel. So that's also relevant in the sense that some of the things we're dealing with at the time is the whole issue of Israel and Palestine. So I want to say that sometimes these big eclipses, and we're looking at really major eclipses, they do have a storyline and a narrative that can play from one to the other. And I probably want to just leave it at there, because otherwise we'll be talking history the whole time and we won't be getting on with this particular solar eclipse and what it presents to us for our discernment. So as you can see, I've set this eclipse for Washington, D.C., the capital of America, because after all, this is called Great American Eclipse. And if you look at the planets again, as we have been looking at these horoscopes for the past year almost, well, we could see this cluster of planets. They're always grouped together. So there's this kind of intensity. This is why events are intense, why we feel everything so profoundly and intensely. There's this concentration of planetary energy, for want of a better word, in one small segment of the diurnal circle, the horoscope that we're looking at. Now, I want to take you through some of the things that are happening in this chart. Certainly from America's point of view, when we look at the solar eclipse, which was happening in the 9th house, as far as America is concerned, that's always foreign affairs. So we're looking out at what's going on in the world and the USA's part in the story of the rest of the world. The USA plays a big part in all sorts of things that happen in other countries, as we've seen happening in Ukraine and Russia, and now Israel and Palestine and so many other places. We look to the United States as the leader of the West. And when we look at this chart, we can see that this huge focus for this solar eclipse is going to be on foreign affairs, on events happening in countries outside the United States. I'm going to leave that just for a minute and point out a few other things about this. If we start the month out on the 1st of April, Mercury is stationary retrograde. Mercury turns stationary retrograde on the 1st of April, which means that at the time of the eclipse, it will be retrograde. Now, it turns direct on the 25th of April, so those of you who are interested in perhaps trying to make the most of a retrograde Mercury, and by that I mean one of the positives about a retrograde Mercury is that you can go back over decisions, you can rethink them, reconsider them, come back and change them. There's a different kind of nuance to retrograde Mercury. It's still Mercury, it's still functioning in communication and travel, dialogue, movement, all those kind of things that Mercury represents, but it's a little more subtle, it's nuanced. And often we see things in a different way on a retrograde Mercury, hence the idea that we can remake our decisions and perhaps reconsider our perspective on one or two matters, change our opinions, if you like. Yes, it may also mean that we take life a little slower, whether that's because we're on holiday or we don't have as much work to do or any work to do, or because there are all sorts of train strikes and air strikes and goodness knows what else going on, which means we can't get from A to B and we have to take it more slowly. A retrograde Mercury also takes us into the past, so that we connect with people that we haven't seen for ages. And that phenomenon I talked about, synchronicities, that you think about that person and then guess what? You connect with them or they connect with you. So a lot of that goes on a retrograde Mercury. What I really don't subscribe to with retrograde Mercuries is you can't do anything on a retrograde Mercury, for instance, like purchasing a car or taking an exam or having an important discussion or even signing a document. Well, it doesn't necessarily thwart the purchase of the car, the signing of the agreement. It doesn't necessarily thwart it. It may take it in different directions, but because you've had to do this, this is the way it's meant to be, and it will have a nuanced meaning. It's not the one you think it's going to have. But don't get really scared that you've had to do this on a retrograde Mercury and you think it's doomed. No, it's not. It just is nuanced, and we need to get a healthier attitude to a retrograde Mercury, a more positive attitude, if you like. So also in this span of time, the run-up to the eclipse, Venus and Neptune will be conjunct. They're going to be conjunct on the 3rd of April, so in that sort of late Easter period. And if you remember, I've talked quite a lot about, certainly in my Friday Bites, about the Neptunian stuff going on, why there've been all these kind of misleading events happening and nobody knows who's telling the truth and why is this happening. There's been loads of conspiracy theories. It's been quite difficult to get at the truth with these strong Neptunian influences. And unfortunately, this Neptunian influence is still around as we start the month of April, and it will continue to be there really past the solar eclipse, if you like. So that's something also to bear in mind, that you've got to question the information you're getting and not go down rabbit holes and follow every conspiracy theory you've ever had. Keep detached, seek the truth, not buy into rumors. On the 5th of April, Venus moves into Aries, and I think you can see on the chart here, there we have Venus in Aries. It's moved on a little bit. And for all Arians, this is good. When we have Venus in our sign, then we tend to be a little bit luckier. Things happen that we feel are favorable, and we feel a little better about ourselves for one reason or another. And also, if you're a Libra, so you have Venus in your opposite sign, Venus highlighting relationships, it becomes a time of improvements for relationships, a time of meeting new love, of making commitments to someone you love. So lots of good things about that Venus in Aries. And even for Cancer and Capricorn, because they are the other two signs we've got that are cardinal signs in this mix. For Cancer, it's really things to do with your role in the world. And that doesn't have to be a career, but it often is. And so Venus brings rewards. If we're looking for Capricorn, we've got the opposite effect going. And we've got things happening in terms of your home life and your family, the roots of life and the foundations of the future. So Venus moving through these areas is good news. As we go on through the month of April, we've got the solar eclipse on the 8th, and I'm going to come back to that because there's something I absolutely have to talk about, and I think you can see what it is. But on the 10th, we have a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Now you'll see it's quite close, it's within a degree. Mars at 13 of Pisces, Saturn at 14 of Pisces. And if you remember, I showed you the solar eclipse of October 1501, And we can see in there a similar Mars-Saturn conjunction, and that played into the story of that particular eclipse, the narrative that that eclipse had to offer us. And remember, this is the beginning of the Saros series, in which this 8th of April solar eclipse is on. So there are echoes. There is not an identikit picture, but there are echoes. And by looking back through history, going through the Saros cycles, we start to discover what those echoes might be and how they will manifest. A Mars-Saturn conjunction, this gives me an opportunity to talk about this, because like a retrograde Mercury, it's got a bad reputation. I've heard people saying that a Mars-Saturn conjunction is evil. It's the most evil thing you can have. Well, maybe back in the Renaissance and going through the Elizabethan times and beyond, the idea that Mars was a malefic and Saturn was the greater malefic, the lesser malefic and the greater malefic, these two planets considered to be very, very difficult, was not viewed favorably. But of course, as we've grown up and learned how much, how different things can be if you see things not so fatalistically, and you can start to look at the properties of a Mars-Saturn conjunction, we can see that they inspire tenacity, firmness of purpose. You can build for the long term on a Mars-Saturn conjunction. You can build solidly and constructively. Yes, it still has its rather negative aspect to it, which means times are tough. And do you need me to tell you that times are tough? They are really, really tough. And this Mars-Saturn conjunction is underscoring that and informing us that it ain't getting any easier, courtesy of this period of time and the solar eclipse. So it's something to be aware of. It's not anything to fear, but it does portend, as it did in 1501, that there's going to be some difficult stuff to come out, not just around the time of this eclipse, but really and truly through the year 2024. We've got to look at this, giving a character to the year as well. So that's really something important we have to look at. Sun goes into Taurus on the 19th of April, and then on the 20th, 21st, we have the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So I'll be dealing with all of that in my next video, not this one, but I'm just giving you a little calendar that you can work to. But I think you can see where I want to go. And the reason that I want to go here is that, as you will see, the Sun at 19 of Aries, the Moon at 19 of Aries, and sandwiched in between at exactly the degree and minute of the Sun is Chiron. Now, Chiron is not a planet, and we need to understand this. It doesn't act like a planet. It has a very strange kind of orbit, and it's called a centaur object. It lies really a little outside our solar system, but it does come into our solar system, which is why I have now really started to incorporate it very much so in my work with people, natal charts, as well as looking at it as I am now from a kind of global perspective. Now, we want to think of Chiron as a process, not a signature, in the sense that we look at Mars and we think of action, war, drive, ambition, courage. We look at it for all those reasons. And we look at Venus for love. We look at Venus for relationship. When we look at Chiron, it's showing us a process, and the process is about healing and pain. So wherever Chiron is in your natal chart, it's showing you where your existential pain is, the thing you cannot fix. It's the thing that must be endured because it cannot be overcome. And that's such an important thing to get in your mind. And as we look at this globally, and we take it out from the personal to the collective, what we're looking at here is a point at which painful situations have to be faced. And we're looking at this in a global sense, and they have to be faced with courage. Why? Because Chiron is in Aries. So we need innovation. we need to attack situations because of the Aries factor playing into the Chironic journey, which is the journey to, well, it isn't really the journey to healing, it's the journey through pain. It's the journey through managing pain. And I've got a little kind of keyword here. Remember, I call the nodal axis Aries Libra the axis of war and peace. Well, I call this idea of Chiron in Aries, and we're looking at its meaning collectively. It's slaying the dragon and freeing the maiden. I think that's a wonderful image to have. And we see St. George and the dragon and the maiden tied up by the rocks. And it's such a powerful image because so many of the things that are relevant, and one of the things I should have said when we looked at the great American eclipse of 2017 is that the Me Too movement started in 2017 on the great American solar eclipse then. So now here we are, another great American solar eclipse, and look at that journey we've been on. And of course, Chiron was in Aries at that time as well. So the story of slaying the dragon to free the maiden, or maybe even slaying the dragon to free the princess, whatever it may be, whatever floats your boat, is a very powerful image to go along with this little cluster. So for all of us, this is a very important time to slay dragons of one sort or another in order to free something within us that has been a prisoner. And I think if we use that kind of imagery to go with this, we see the hugely positive dimension of this solar eclipse, what it means to us collectively and individually. And of course, I'm going to take you through this sign by sign very, very shortly. And this sort of takes me to a point, and the video of the lunar eclipse a couple of weeks ago, I talked a lot about Princess Catherine. I showed her chart and I showed the significance of the eclipses. And I want to come back again and talk about that because this is in light of Catherine's announcement that she has cancer, but it's being treated, and obviously there's every chance that this will be something to conquer and everything will be fine. But nevertheless, what it's done and how that diagnosis is so awful to be given, and especially when you've got a young family, I mean, this was terrible for all concerned, and quite rightly heralded by, first of all, the lunar eclipse of the 14th of October, and then this solar eclipse. Oh, no, it was the other way around. The solar eclipse of the 14th of October, and then the lunar eclipse of the 28th of October, which flanked the her MCIC axis. But what was so significant was that on the 14th of October in the solar eclipse, Saturn was absolutely on her, the eclipse was on her natal Saturn. And now here we come to April the 8th, the eclipse at 19 degrees of Aries is opposite that Saturn. So we can see the narrative of all of this unfolding. And as I said, I'm not going to see anything into it, but Saturn and Mars and Saturn mean the prognosis is dire. I'm not going to go in that direction at all. I'm just going to say it is what it is. We're seeing these things being indicated by the important things that, well, I've been discussing ever since I began this video to you. So I want to get on looking at it sign by sign. But before I get there, remember at the beginning of the video, I talked about the comments that you make, which I read and respond to a lot of them. I can't respond to everyone because there's not enough hours in the day. But I do read them all. And a recent one, it's been asked on many occasions, and it has to do with the images that I put up when I'm going sign by sign. So I show if you're Aries or you've got Aries rising, where these configurations are, and it becomes something for you to look at and for me to be able to talk about. So I got a question this last time about, which house system am I using? Well, I don't use a house system at all on the images that I'm going to be showing you now, and always do as illustrations of the sun sign, rising sign interpretation. That's just designed to show you know roughly what things are. Of course, when I'm looking at important events and I'm taking them from, as in this case, the perspective of Washington, DC, then I am using a house system, and I'm using the house system Placidus. And that's something that is by choice I use this. And like all astrologers, we make a choice about which house system we're going to use. And the choice that I made to use Placidus as a house system was based on the fact that I prefer a quadrant system. I like the way time or space is divided up into the quadrants, so we see exactly how long it took the sun, for instance, to get to the midheaven, or that space. It seems to me more accurate in terms of getting every house at the right place. There are many choices you can make about which quadrant system you want to use. And Placidus, I think 17th century, that's when that came about. But Koch, for instance, that was 1960. So lots of systems based on a quadrant system that I would consider to be the best way to look at horoscopes. That having been said, the other thing to take note of, and this again is the way it looks when I show you these little illustrations going with your sign, is that a lot of astrologers in the last sort of 20 years or so have taken to whole sign astrology. And this is really America driven. It's the American astrology movement that's tended to really pioneer the whole sign system. And as I said, it's a matter of taste. It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's what you choose to do. But this whole sign system goes back to Hellenistic times. So we're looking at, well, the peak of the Hellenistic times were 500 to 300 BC. So we're going many millennia back. And fine, if you want to use that, that's fine. And it works for you, lovely. But for me, I believe astrology has progressed. And we look at these great astrologers working from the time of Ptolemy all the way through to the Renaissance and beyond, when we knew more about astronomy and how the Earth went around the sun, not the other way around. I think perhaps the idea of a quadrant system is perhaps a little more sophisticated, but there again, I don't want to create enemies right now. All right, lecture over. Let's get into it, and let's start with Aries. So Aries, yes, this is a total solar eclipse in your sign. And obviously, if it is your birthday, within 2 or 3 days around that solar eclipse time, your year ahead is going to be one of the most memorable years you've had in your life. It's going to be off the charts, whether we're talking about events that happen that are surprising to you, or the fact that you have reached a point where you're making some very big life decisions, and that this solar eclipse is reinforcing what you already have in mind. So when we think about a solar eclipse and we think about the moon eclipsing the sun, there is a suggestion here, as always, that there's something hidden, so you can't know exactly what this eclipse is going to bring. And although we think of the power of the sun being obliterated by the moon, and you might therefore say, is this going to mean that the power I have to chart my own course is eclipsed by the moon? We could say that, but there's always choice in the wake of an event you weren't expecting. You have a choice as to what you're going to do about it. So there is still choice, even if that idea of fate taking you by the hand is a really, really strong one. Whether we're looking at April being the time when singular events take place, or whether they're going to happen throughout the year, they will have a reference to this period of time when things were set in motion, or certainly the signature is going to appear again on the chart of the event that happens in the future. Now, Chiron is in Aries, and I want to make a point. I was just realizing as I'm talking to you that I actually forgot to talk about the Chiron Return, which I would like to do more towards the end of this video, but enough to say right now, Chiron is moving through Aries, and therefore it's moving through your sun sign or moving through your first house if you have Aries rising. So it's very personal. So a lot of things that you're finding difficult to fix have a lot to do with your personal life. They have a lot to do with who you think you are. And, you know, there's a struggle involved here. And there can be real physical pain, whether, you know, you find during the course of Chiron moving through your sign that you have more injuries, or that you have more things that happen to you that sort of knock you back, knock you off your perch. But the whole idea is, as I said a little bit earlier on, that you face your difficulties and the things you can't fix and the shadows that seem to haunt your life. You face them with courage. And it doesn't mean you can necessarily clear them up right away, and you may not clear them up. But by facing them and dealing with them, you are learning how to handle them. And that's one of the important things of the eclipse, whatever this eclipse brings up. Remember, you may not be able to cure it or change it, but you can learn how to live with it. And that's really, really important. Coming back to the idea of where some of these other planets are, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction to come is in the area of finance, the area of self-worth. So there are surprises to come in the month of April. And I'd like to think for Aries that these are going to be good surprises, coming into money, making a little bit more money, seeing your financial empire expand. Although it can also be unexpected things happening to money, unexpected outgoings, payments for something, and that can make your financial world wobble a bit. And of course, it's the area of self-worth. So there is the possibility to have an upgrade to your self-worth, as well as there is to have a bit of a shock to the system because it isn't as you thought. Your value isn't quite as you thought it would be to others. And we'll talk more about that on a different video. But Mars and Saturn, you've got Mars, your ruling planet, next to Saturn. It's in the 12th house, your preceding sign. It really is important for you to watch your health, I think, Aries. And it means not doing too much, not overdoing it, to watch out for those things that seem to you to be pushing you too hard. And also, I think if you do feel rather anxious, perhaps a little bit negative about what's going on in your world, remember it's transitory. It's not going to be there forever. And a little bit of reflection, not beating yourself up, so important with Mars and Saturn. Remember, if you get a Mars-Saturn event, which is a bit crushing and a bit disappointing, remember you can work your way through it, because Saturn is always trying to teach you that you can grow strong through this, not be weakened by it. So yes, this total eclipse for you is a big game changer. So if we come to Taurus, then the solar eclipse is taking place in your preceding sign in the 12th house of the solar chart. That's if you are a sun Taurus and you don't know what your ascending sign is. But if you know you've got Taurus rising, you'll know that that sun moon eclipsed and Chiron and the current node are all moving through the 12th house. And the 12th house I call the house of shadows and secrets, the house of secrets and shadows. It's because everything is a little bit subliminal. You're not getting a full picture of anything. And of course, when we are in a kind of don't know phase of our life, that everything seems to be in soft focus or a little bit woolly and foggy, we lose our bearings. So you may already be feeling this, Taurus, that you've somehow lost your grip on something. It doesn't mean you've lost your grip completely. It just means there's probably one situation that is going on that you feel you're not able to handle terribly well. You may feel that situations are slipping through your fingers. You may feel that you are powerless to somehow change something or get a hold of that. Now, just keep reminding yourself this is very temporary and it will change. But if during the time of the eclipse you get an event or an experience that comes out of left field and you think, what was that about? And I really feel this is very negative. This is not a happy experience for me. This is something very negative, and it's made me very fearful and anxious about things. Remember, this is temporary. The sun is going to move into Taurus on the 20th, 19th, 20th of April, and you will have much more of a grip on things by that time. So relax, let the events that happen around the time of the eclipse, let them settle. It's like letting the sediment settle in a bottle, and you can then see clearly through, once it's settled. And that's the advice you need to give yourself. It's also prior to this solar eclipse, if you haven't yet done so, as the sun moves through the 12th house, it's a very, very good time to get a health MOT, which means having a checkup, dental checkup, an overall physical checkup, and of course a spiritual checkup. I mean, the 12th house is all about the spiritual aspects of one's existence. And I think personally it's very difficult to live without some kind of spiritual framework. And I think if you're interested in astrology, and certainly if you're an astrologer, it would be impossible to do astrology without a spiritual framework. And the fact that the sun is moving through there, the fact we've got a solar eclipse there, says to me that this is really a powerful time for the resurgence of your spiritual life. The events are geared to making you more aware and awakened to your spiritual path, because Chiron, of course, is in there as well. It's making you aware of old wounds, and we can think about those old wounds in the sense of karma, past lives, ancestral genes, memories coming in, that these have haunted you. And this is what is your existential pain, if you like, is that you can't seem to figure out what these shadows are, what these patterns are, and you keep trying and trying and trying. So the thing is to learn to live with the shadows. And, there is this, maybe I'm not making a very good point, but I think you'll stay with me on this. Remember, there was this cave in myth where the only way you could see anything that was happening in the outside world was through the shadows that the sun created on the cave walls. And that's a bit like what this is like, this solar eclipse, the passage in the 12th house, that you're seeing shadows forming the nature of the world or the nature of the situation or whatever it is. And remember, at some point, you're going to come out and see it in the reality. So those shadows are important because they lend nuance to what's going on, but you won't see it clearly, perhaps until the sun starts moving through that first house or through the sign of Taurus. And while I'm suggesting it's a good time to attend to the health of my body and spirit, it is not a good time to become an absolute hypochondriac. Remember, getting a grip is something we sometimes can't do in the 12th house. And so you need to get a grip. And maybe that will also help you through this massive solar eclipse, Chiron, everything that's going on at the time. Okay, let's move forward to Gemini. So Gemini, the solar eclipse for you is taking place in the 11th house. This is an area to do with collaboration. This house, when we look at what the houses are naturally ruled by, it's ruled by Aquarius. And we know Aquarius is this humanitarian sign, the sign of brotherhood. It's to do with, light years ahead thinking. But it's also got to do with control. That's also Aquarian. So we see with this solar eclipse in the 11th house, we have as a portent here of a new friendship, a new collaboration, some new thing that is or depends on a group, on teamwork, on team spirit. But also we can look at this solar eclipse having to do with the humanitarian side of life. So it's an opportunity for something new in your life that will enable you to manifest your humanitarian qualities and become interested in groups and in societies and cultures in which, you know, you can be effective and you can learn from as well. And while we all, to a certain extent, are alone in the world, in that, you know, here we are our own person with our own ego, we're with our own brain, we're making our own decisions as we go through the day. What we learn when we've got something important happening in the 11th house is the importance of collaboration, the importance of all for one, one for all, and that will flow through your work life, your personal life, your social life, through everything. This idea of the more hands, the better, the more, the merrier, the idea that the group and the collective are, you know, more important at this stage than just you personally as an individual. So yes, new opportunities, new enterprises, especially things to do with entrepreneurial ventures, startup companies, something that says, hey, guess what? There's a brilliant opportunity here. It's going to be innovative. It's going to demand some courage. It's going to demand my, you know, collaborating with other people. But what a great opportunity. May also have something to do with a friend. There may be something happening in the life of a friend or in the life of a friendship that's going to change its nature. Okay, last thing that we need to think of really is the impact of Chiron here. Sometimes it's quite difficult to work in a group or in a team, isn't it? And with Chiron moving through the 11th house, you're probably encountering situations where you don't seem to get on well with your team members, or your ideas for things seem to be in conflict with others. And maybe it's your peer group as well that you don't seem to be gelling with, and maybe really struggling to, you know, to gain traction in that group or with that enterprise. So the solar eclipse conjoined to Chiron makes you aware of what's going on in this. And instead of fighting it so much, and instead of despairing about it, it is absolutely learning to manage it. And you can manage it. And that's what this whole little setup is all about. Incidentally, last word on this, Mars and Saturn, right up there in the 10th house of career, maybe flowing into this solar eclipse story, is going to be some kind of setback on the work front, or some kind of work situation, career situation that demands a lot to get through. But as always with Mars and Saturn, tenacity pays off. So don't give up at the first fence. You have to work it through. And in a way, Chiron is saying the same thing. Don't leave something because it's too painful or you feel you're going to fail. Keep on going, work it through. Okay, now we come to Cancer. Now this solar eclipse for you is happening in one of the main areas of your solar chart. So if you've got Cancer rising or you are a Sun Cancer, we're looking at this solar eclipse in the 10th house of career, role in life, where you're headed. It's very much your material world. It's very much you out there where people can see you, where you gain recognition for things, where you put your stamp on the world. And I suppose we put our stamp on the world a lot of the time by buying a house or where we live, which accommodates the opposite side or the opposite end of the 10th house, the 4th house, which is to do with where you come from, your home and your family. So all this does kind of play into this solar eclipse. Now, it's going to portend an absolutely brilliant new job or new role for you, especially if you have a birthday round about the, let's say, the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, or 10th of July. Or, you know, you've got planets and points around the 19 degrees of the cardinal signs. It can also show huge change in your role. So you could be in the same line of work, if you like, but now you've got a new role. You've got a new kind of label on your office door, for want of a better word. But it could also mean there is a release from your job, whether this is something that you inspire, that you have wanted, or whether it comes out of thin air, that suddenly the job you thought you had isn't anymore. Now, of course, that means diversification, and that's where the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is playing in. And I think also, as a Cancerian, or with Cancer rising, you don't like change. You like things to be familiar and consistent. You value these things. And so for you, sudden change is quite threatening. But often that it's blinding you to the possibilities within the change. And if you do get a change thrust upon you, something you weren't expecting, remember, the secret to it all is diversification. You need to channel the situation, your energies, your talents, your plans, whatever it is, into a new direction. Now, we've also got Chiron involved in this eclipse setup. And that means that the painful situations, the journey that you're on while Chiron is moving through the 10th house, is showing you that, well, nothing comes easily for a start, and that you don't get what you want for a start, that you feel you're being denied something that you should be able to have and do, especially in line of work, but it can flow out through other important areas of your life. And it's getting over the fact that should have, could have, would have needs no longer to be in your vocabulary. You're not going to use those words. It is what it is. Yes, maybe you're not getting the breaks that you wanted. Maybe you're not getting the respect that you want. Maybe all sorts of things. You're struggling to put your name out there, to be recognized, to have people respect you, and they're not. So learn to respect yourself. As long as you respect yourself and you have respect for what you do and what you are doing in life, that's where it all begins and ends. For now. Eventually, Chiron will move out of the 10th house. It'll move elsewhere. But it's a little over halfway through your 10th house. So still a long way to go. But the trick is really acceptance and learning to manage it rather than to push against it all the time and to beat yourself up for it. And remember, what that solar eclipse is offering you is something really amazing to come out of any unexpected endings or unexpected developments. Let's now turn to Leo. And this solar eclipse, this total solar eclipse, is happening for you in the 9th house. If you've got Leo rising, or you are a Sun Leo and that's all you know. Although, I like looking at things from a solar perspective, as well as if you know exactly where these things are taking place. And of course, this solar eclipse is in your fellow fire sign of Aries. So a lot of the things about this quality that's in this solar eclipse are going to resonate very well with you. So remember, I've used the words courage, innovation, yes, conflict, yes, ambition and drive and all of those other words. But, this is something that isn't alien to your nature. And so in a way, it's sort of saying the things that come out of this solar eclipse, the events that are related to it, the events presided over by this eclipse are in your best interests. They are something you can cope with. They are something that resonates with you in some degree. We look at the 9th house, and what is the 9th house? It's the area of far horizons. So it can mean distant places and people in distant places. It can mean distant, well, not distant ambitions, but if we think about things we aspire to in the way of learning, the wisdom we want to accrue, whether it means learning something, a university course or a really long-term course that is going to add to our bank of knowledge and wisdom. This solar eclipse is about all of that. So it may be you've got an opportunity to do something along the lines of acquiring wisdom and knowledge. It may mean that you're on this long journey, and this journey is going to take you to a very different place. And maybe even right now, as this solar eclipse occurs, and you've got it connected to Chiron as well, that this year And maybe even this April period is a time when you realize what that journey is all about. You're either already embarked on it or you're about to begin. And you can see instantly that it's going to change your life. Remember, all eclipses are game changers. But in the 9th house, they have a lot to do with things that are far ahead in the future. You're always looking to something that will materialize further down the line. It's your 10-year plan. It's things that are happening beyond your own backyard. Remember when we looked at the chart of the solar eclipse in the sense of Washington, D.C., we saw that that solar eclipse was taking us out of the United States, and the focus was on foreign countries, other cultures, distant places. And it's the same for Leo, or with Leo rising. This solar eclipse is all about distance, and it's about perspective. So this solar eclipse will give you a different perspective on your life. And that might be quite literal. You'll go on a journey to a distant place, and of course, that makes you think about life in a different way. And you may even want to live in a different place. The place you go to is the place you're going to be. And that may be instantly. You may go towards that this year, move, work in a different place, or it may become part of your 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan. But it's in there. It has to do with distant places, has to do with the acquisition of knowledge and information. And also, I think your consciousness is thirsting for something bigger and better than you have at present. And that solar eclipse is like a blaze of glory saying, go find it. These opportunities are arising this year, 2020-2024. Don't stick to what you know. Remember that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the 10th house. Change, diversify, go where you've never gone before. In fact, I think if I had one thing to say about that solar eclipse in the 9th house, it would be go where you've never gone before. Now, also Chiron is in the mix, so let's forget that journeys are going to be painful at times. So the journeys you make acquiring knowledge and wisdom are going to take you to some dark places where you feel you'll never do it, you'll never get it. But you must go on. Chiron is asking you, if we get Chiron to ask us anything, it's about managing this experience. It's not about giving up. It's not about assuming that everything will be all right in, a year's time or whatever. It's not about that. It's about accepting it and learning to manage it. That's what it's about. So manage your challenges, whatever they are, work your way through them. And that's also reflected in that Mars-Saturn conjunction, which may have an effect financially on you as well. Maybe you feel the real drawbacks, the struggles to the journey you're making are financial. So you're going to feel you've got setbacks or financial shortages, but you know what? You just got to find a way around it. And acceptance and management is the way through that. So let's now go to Virgo. And the solar eclipse for you is in the 8th house, that mysterious house that I think astrologers sometimes kind of gloss over because its meanings are so deep. And, when you think you're trying to speak generally to everybody, and really what you want to do with the 8th house is get in one-on-one, getting right to the core of things, getting down deep, doing a huge, deep dive. So in a way, we could say that this solar eclipse is encouraging you to take a deep dive into something. And what happens when you take a deep dive in terms of the 8th house, which is ruled by Scorpio and Pluto, is that you are reborn. So this solar eclipse is about death and rebirth for Virgo, for you. Virgo rising, this eclipse in the 8th house. And it's not physical death. It is the death of an ideal, the death of a situation. It's, being able to go through something that's quite painful. And of course, we've got Chiron in there as well. So we know that's going to be a very painful journey. And so we look at that and think, but, it's got to be taken, because as we take it and as we go through it, my goodness, the metamorphosis the rebirth that takes place after that is fantastic. And the solar eclipse is about that. It's about that journey of transformation for you, painful as it may be. It's also a financial house. So we are also looking at big things that can happen to you financially. A solar eclipse is a new moon eclipse. So we're looking at something new and unexpected about finances. Could it be an inheritance? Could it be a settlement? Could it be something happening totally out of the blue that transforms for the better your financial system? Yes, it could be. But the opposite is just as true, that something you weren't expecting, perhaps an unexpected financial outlay, some kind of thing that you were expecting to come in and provide for you, that's no longer happening. So the solar eclipse is sort of changing your financial patterns. It's also to do with other people. So one of the things that may need to be done at this time is to really talk to financial institutions, whether they're banks and lending institutions, whatever they may be, credit card companies. There will be a way through with your financial partners. And it's the same with partners, like life partners with whom you have financial responsibilities. The things that happen to finances need to be shared now. And sharing is really important. And this is a house of receivership, I often say. So let's put bankruptcy on one side for a minute and think about the importance of being able to receive. Lots of us are very good at giving, but we're hopeless at receiving. So this solar eclipse is about receiving. We have to receive what's given to us, and we have to be gracious about it. We don't throw it back in someone's face. We take it graciously and work with whatever has been given to us and work it through. And remember, Chiron is in this part of the chart as well, your solar chart. And the idea that Chiron is something you can't fix and you keep trying to fix it. So it may seem as though the situations that come up related to this eclipse, and remember, it's not just April the 8th, we're talking about 2024 as a whole, almost, it's that important. So there are lots of things that are to do with patterns you keep running into. Oh, this has happened to me before. Why does this happen to me? What is going on here? Why do I keep meeting these patterns? Well, the thing is that you keep meeting them and sort of trying to overcome them, but they're not overcome completely. They get filed away because they've not been dealt with, and back they come again. That's why you're having repeating situations. But the thing to do is remember, this is a long-term thing. This isn't something that's going to be over on April the 8th or next year, you know, whatever. It's something that's going to be a pattern in your life, and learning to manage it and to deal with it in a, well, again, I come back to this word graciousness, is the way through it. And it's just that simple way of, I mean, this is something that is taught in religions as well. It's accepting what you are given graciously. And I think that's the meaning of this solar eclipse. And if what you're given is fabulous, accept it graciously. And if what you're given is not so fabulous, accept it graciously. Mars and Saturn, of course, are in your 7th house. So we have this quite challenging couple at the same time as the eclipse there. So there may be some problem with another person. There could be difficulties in a relationship. It may seem as though a relationship has gone south, that a partner is going through something that's painful. It could be all sorts of manifestations, but it will play into the story of the eclipse. And the thing to remember when anything happens in our 7th house is that it's a mirror. The 7th house is a mirror. And so the things that appear to be happening to other people who we're close to, or we see happening and we don't like it, is also a reflection of something that we need to deal with. This is something we need to acknowledge. And that's sort of along the same lines as what I've been talking about in receivership as well. Quite a lot to swallow, but let's not forget that I've said some pretty good things about this particular solar eclipse to you as well. So let me turn the chart around. So now I have Libra. So of course, the nodal axis, we've got the south node going through Libra. So a lot of references to what's going on could go back sort of 9 years, 9.5 years ago. And you might be able to relate that, what was happening 9.5 years ago, the singular events of that period of time. What's happening now may feel like that, or there's a repeat or a connection from that 9.5 years ago. And because it's the south node that is in your sign, there is an aspect of this, or what's happening to you at the moment, that is saying, look, you've done this before. And in some kind of ways, it's so familiar, it's a comfort. But actually, you need to look in the direction of the opposite end, which is the 7th house in your case, because that's the direction of travel. So old familiar bolt holes, ways of dealing with things that you've tried and tested and you've done, though that's not the route you go. You are looking in a new direction. And when we look at this solar eclipse in the area of relationships, for some Librans, this is going to be a new relationship starting, but with someone unlike anyone you have ever had a relationship with before. For whatever reason, this is absolutely out there. Now, because you will have started this relationship on an eclipse, it means that this person is of huge significance in your life. And even if the relationship does not last a lifetime, even if it lasts only 3 months, this is going to be one of the most important life experiences you have. Now, of course, you might not be in a relationship with someone, but someone will enter your life and make a big difference to your fate, for want of a better word. So people who cross your path, things that happen to you through the agency of other people, is going to make a big difference. Now, in a relationship that you have going on, whether it's a business partnership or whether it's a life partnership with someone, marriage, something like that, it can mean that there's a whole new chapter coming in. And it's not just any old chapter. This is one of the most important chapters of the relationship, just about to begin. Does it mean you're going to merge in business together? Does it mean that something that happens to the two of you is going to have a huge mark on your relationship? We don't know until you get there, but these are all the possibilities that it may suggest. It's also an opportunity to do something different with your relationship. Remember, we've got the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction happening almost at the same time, which is about diversification. So you need to change your relationship up a bit. It needs change. And ideally, you want to bring that fresh air into your established relationships without something happening and making it necessary to have change. But either way, it's about changing the relationship. Now, it could be, in some cases, that this is what you've been waiting for in terms of the relationship is over, a relationship is over, but it's new territory from here on in. And again, we need to stretch this out. It's not just April, or certainly not just April the 8th. We're looking at the whole of 2024, because there are going to be other eclipses, one involving your sign later on in the year. So this is an important moment in terms of things happening, and therefore you have to make huge adjustments. That this total solar eclipse is conjunct Chiron. It says here that you've got patterns in your relationship life, patterns with partnerships in general, romantic partnerships in particular, marriages. So this solar eclipse is saying you can't keep running into these patterns. And maybe the pattern is this, that when you run into a real difficult patch in a relationship, your tendency is to cut and run. Therefore, you need to change it and do something different, and don't cut and run. If, on the other hand, your pattern is to stick with something, regardless of how bad it is for you, then you've got to change your pattern and you've got to cut and run. So it is about patterns and relationship patterns that cause you pain and strife through your life, that really at this point, new strategies are needed. But also thinking about that mirror going up, which is what always happens in relationships, is that looking into, you know, the patterns that are there in relationships. It's also a sense of, you know what, maybe this is something I'm not exactly comfortable with, but I know what it is. And you know what? I'm going to learn how to manage this better. I'm going to learn how to manage this pattern better than I have done before. And because we've also got a Mars-Saturn conjunction in at the time of the eclipse, the Jupiter-Uranus saying diversification, we've got Mars and Saturn saying you need tenacity, you need to, you know, push on through the walls that keep being built up in front of you. We've got quite a picture of this in connection, particularly with relationships and other people in your life. I would also say that people you meet, and I suppose we could say throughout the course of 2024, but certainly around the time of the eclipse, these people are teachers. They're going to teach you something. They're going to open doors for you. They're going to open the doors of the mind, so to speak, and all sorts of things for you. Maybe even more than one person, but certainly one person will act as this mentor, teacher. So that's also important in this solar eclipse for you, Libra. Coming now to Scorpio. And we look at this solar eclipse taking place in the 6th house. Again, one of these houses that people struggle with, because the idea that the 6th house is about work and health, you know, how does that figure? How can it be work and how can it be health? But it's not really about work per se or health per se. It's about the common theme that anoints these two aspects of existence. And it's about systems. And we talk about our health system, don't we? Oh, my system's doing just fine. And work is about systems, isn't it? And even the idea that this is the way routines are run in your life. We have a daily routine. We get up in the morning, we clean our teeth, we take the children to school, we put our feet up and watch television, you know, whatever it is. We have a pattern and a system around which our life runs. And that extends into all other systems. It's also the rules, the regulations, the kind of sense of purpose we have, the duties, the responsibilities we have. This is all wrapped up in that 6th house, which is why also in the 6th house, we find our purpose in life. And it tends to be where we are of service to other people. It's a house of service too. It's where we don't think of ourselves per se, or the applause that we're going to get for doing things. It's the act of service that we perform for other people. And often when we do or perform an act of service, so we sense what we're doing is a service to others, we automatically get that sense, hey, I found my purpose. I know what that feels like. So that 6th house, ever so important, and we've got an eclipse in there. Well, I suppose it could mean there's a new job coming your way. Oh yes, well, that's good. That's going to change things up. It could mean that there's a whole new routine to life. And why is there a whole new routine? Anything could have happened. You could have had a new baby. You could have had someone else coming to live with you. So you've got to develop new routines. But whatever it is that's changing your daily routine is unexpected and sudden. Comes out like the sun coming out of a dark cloud. So that the element of surprise, the element of the unusual is bound up in this solar eclipse in the 6th house. And another system that we must look at is a health system. So will this solar eclipse illuminate for you something that needs attending to? You know, whether it's an injury, whether it's a dental problem, whether it's, well, it could be anything, but be observant. But also remember, Chiron is in this mix. And when we put Chiron in the 6th house, there is that extra attention we need to health and, physical health, injuries, and things that happen to us that then causes pain. And it can be physical pain. So we need to be alert to that, deal with physical pain as best we can, and also think about spiritual pain, emotional pain, psychological pain. Those things we may have to learn to live with and manage, as opposed to being able to knock them on the head and cure them. We may have to learn more, and this is what the solar eclipse combined with Chiron is telling us, that we have to learn how to manage this, not how to overcome it. That's a bridge too far. But sometimes in learning not to try to overcome it, but learning to manage it, we do manage to almost overcome it. Other things about this, we've got this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction happening at the same time as the solar eclipse. So we're also looking at surprise developments in the area of relationships. So the solar eclipse is tied into that as well, a new relationship, something amazing happening to you through the agency of another person. Or is it a breakup? Remember, I've got 3 words for Uranus: breakthrough, break up, and breakdown. So we're playing around with that theme around the time of the eclipse. Be open to it. Don't assume you know what it is. Don't assume it's going to be bad. It can be brilliant. It's about what you didn't know before. And can that illuminate and awaken? Yes, it can. So this solar eclipse tied into that is about the extent that an awakening can, what it can produce in the way of major life changes. So there's a lot of things to think of in the context of this total solar eclipse, because it's not just the eclipse itself, it's what else is going on at the time, what plays into all of that. So on to Sagittarius. Sagittarius, this solar eclipse, total solar eclipse, is in your fellow fire sign of Aries. So there's a certain sympathy here. If we go through some of those words that I used about the solar eclipse: innovation, courage, attack, ambition, war, I hate to say, but this idea that these themes are fiery themes, like your fire sign nature as a Sagittarian, or with Sagittarius rising, there's tremendous creative energy here. This solar eclipse is about the creation of something new. Is it a new project? Is it a new enterprise? Is it a new baby? Is it a new romance? It could be any of those things, but remember, this is about creativity is its common source. And so what happens is linked to the creative areas of life. Now, because this solar eclipse is linked to Chiron, it may take you back to failures that you've experienced before in regard to creative matters. Is it that you've tried to produce something and it ended in failure, or you struggled with it and you felt it wasn't worth it, or you didn't get recognition for the effort that you've put into your creative endeavor? Is it, even in some cases, the struggle you've had to conceive, or the struggle you've had with children? So that there's also the sense that the solar eclipse is playing into past experiences, and not past joys so much as past sadnesses and past difficulties. So instead of, sort of looking at, whatever this eclipse is representing in the sense of a new creative project, rather than remembering, oh, I've been here before and it didn't work well, it's to say, oh, okay, I have known this before, but I'm going to manage this better this time. I'm going to deal with this in a way that I'm moving along with it. I'm not fighting it or preparing for something that hasn't had happened. You're just going movement by movement, day by day, accepting what it is, learning where you failed before, getting familiar with it again, but not being stifled by it or not beating yourself up. And so let's look at the area of romance. How many times have you had a broken heart, Sagittarius? Well, yeah, everybody's had a broken heart. There isn't anyone walking this planet who hasn't had a broken heart. So you can't prevent a broken heart from happening. It just happens. So if you've been staving off, falling in love, forming a relationship, putting yourself out there, don't. Embrace this as something which can happen when you give your heart to someone. It can be broken. But knowing that gives you courage. It's a little bit like, not exactly the same, but we think about kamikaze pilots in the war, those brave Japanese pilots who knew they were flying to their death. But in so doing, it freed them from all fear. They had no fear and they died a hero. So in a way, this is about fear, isn't it? It's about not letting the fear of patterns that you seem to fall into stopping you from moving forward and having a very rich and beautiful experience. So I'm giving you examples here of how to fight the fear and so, you know, manage things differently this time around. Now, we've also got Mars-Saturn at the base of your chart. We've also got a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the 6th house, which is all about systems, health, work, all sorts of things, responsibilities, duties. So there is a feeling here that playing into this eclipse are two things. Struggle on the one hand with a family member or with getting a mortgage or the home itself. You've got problems with homes. Maybe you're even fearing homelessness. Something like that is playing into this eclipse so that things happen and will happen in 2024, but whether they happen around the time of the eclipse or a little bit later on, we can't be sure at this point. But it's a random development that will change the status quo. So in view of this Mars-Saturn conjunction, I talked about tenacity and keeping on going. That's a very important component with Mars and Saturn. So if you've got a situation that you think you'd rather not have because it's just too difficult or too painful, you've really got to go to the very end before you say you admit defeat, is one thing I would say. But I think also here, it's sort of about, it sort of ties in with Chiron as well, this sense of a fear of failure and that the fear of things is worse than their actuality. And that in focusing with Mars and Saturn on the idea of crystallization and construction, the hard work, the steps you are taking towards the fulfillment of something is all going to be of purpose. And the Jupiter-Uranus is also showing you the power of the random to change what you think of as a set piece. Okay, Sagittarius? So let's now move on to Capricorn. And Capricorn is another cardinal sign. So this solar eclipse is taking place in a cardinal house. And if you're born sort of around the 8th of January, for instance, or you know you've got planets and points at 19 degrees of the cardinal signs, then this solar eclipse is going to be really important for you. And again, I'm urging you not to just look at the day, although I do suspect that April will be a month of a lot of change for you. But the whole of 2024 has got this eclipse signature on it. So it's going to be a milestone year for you. And where is it going to be a milestone year? It's going to be in connection with the home, the family members, the roots of life, the foundations of the future. And that can also bring in career. And we think about a solar eclipse producing something we never expected. So is it that a sudden turn of events means you're going to move house? A sudden turn of events means something happens to a member of the family and it changes the family structure. It could be a great announcement, you know, a new baby. It could be someone getting married. It's going to change the shape of the family. It could also be just simply a new home. And maybe this is something you've already got in the planner. Remember, I talked about, you know, it doesn't always mean a totally random event that the eclipse is about. You may already have decided that you want to do something to change your life, and part of that change is to do with where you live. Are you going to do something really radical and move countries or move counties or states? Or are you going to move? Are you going to downsize? Or are you going to upgrade? Or is there going to be a random reason that you have to get out of your home and find somewhere else to live? All these are possibilities covered by this solar eclipse. Let's look at this solar eclipse conjoined to Chiron. Remember, Chiron is taking quite a while to go through this area of the horoscope. So there are lots of lessons to do with family and property and your place in the world in terms of where you've come from. So Chiron is sort of showing you that your background isn't your enemy. And I think sometimes all of us feel there's something wrong with a member of the family, or where we've come, we think, oh, if only that hadn't happened, if only I'd been born to a different family or whatever. But we have to learn to live with our family. We have to learn to love our family. And that's what Chiron is saying. Learn with the limitations that you find within your family structure. Learn to live with them. That's all you can do. And we can apply that message to other things as well, as, you know, things to do with your base in life. You know, learn to live with what you've got. And in learning to live with it, things change as well. I mean, it's a shift. It's an energy shift, for want of a better word. And that's, again, what Chiron is offering you here. But maybe, too, you look back in your past and you think, I've been here before. This is the same situation again. Why me? Well, it means you haven't yet learned how to manage it. So Chiron is bringing you another opportunity to manage this same situation, but in a different way. Now, Mars and Saturn are in conjunction at the time of this the solar eclipse. So we're also looking at thinking, mindsets. Is it you've got a certain mindset about something and it's been unchanging and unchangeable? Well, this is all about looking at situations in their reality. That's important. Saturn is the planet of reality, and Mars is challenging you to look at the reality of a situation as opposed to the fantasy of it. But it's all about structure. So you're structuring a new mindset. And this is playing into either what the eclipse has, you know, presided over, a change, which now means you have to have a different outlook about something, or a different outlook in terms of looking through your windows. And we've also got the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in there, which is saying, you know, this is about diversification as well. This is about the arrival of the new, the sudden, the unexpected, but something to be embraced, not to be rejected. So lots of things playing into this time and into this year that mean, Capricorn, you definitely need to shift your position. And I think that's the solar eclipse in a nutshell. Whether we're thinking about shifting your position because you've got a new home or a new position in the family, or whether we're thinking in general about shifting your position, changing your mindset. Okay, so Aquarius, our penultimate sign. And this solar eclipse is taking place in the third house. And the third house is all about movement. It's about communication. It's about thought patterns. It's about our environment, our immediate neighborhood. And it's about things that are close to us, but not actually with us in the sense of, well, let me explain things somewhere. The fourth house being home and family, these are things that we grew up with. So when we look at the third house and we're looking at our neighborhood, this is the neighborhood we may have moved to from our original base in life. But it's a little bit more than that. It's also the effects of people in our lives who we might think of as siblings. We may not have brothers and sisters. I don't have brothers and sisters, but I certainly have friends who I feel of as sisters and brothers. And so this area of the horoscope can also encompass that to do with things that are in your neighborhood, in your small world. Let's look at it that way. So the message of an eclipse is often brought to us by somebody. It's brought to us by a person. So let's look at this in your life and think, is the message of this solar eclipse something to do with a sibling or somebody who you feel of as a sibling? Is it something happening in their lives that is the meaning of the eclipse? Or is it something that they do to you, say to you, bring into your life that amounts to a huge change of outlook and a huge shift in you in some regard? Is it what you're learning? Remember, the third house ruled by Mercury is about the acquisition of knowledge. It's more about skills and knowledge. When we look at the ninth house, we're often thinking about advanced knowledge. And we're at the University of Life in the ninth house. In the third house, we're in high school. If the ninth house is the novelist and the academic, then the third house is the journalist. And so we're looking at things that matter to us in the immediate environment. So that solar eclipse could be something happening in your neighborhood that is extraordinary. It's wow. And it changes your immediate outlook. It could be something that you're working on, something that you're learning, and it just changes everything. You now think about things in a whole different way. That's a beautiful solar eclipse. But let's also look at the idea of movement here. And remember that this solar eclipse is conjoined to Chiron as well. There is something that brings pain. So if you've got a problem in your neighborhood, or a problem with your neighbors, or a problem with your siblings, or friends you are close to, or workmates, then this is going to be even more of a pain. And it may be unsolvable. I mean, that's one of the things about Chiron, is you can't fix it. And when Chiron comes to town, you are aware of things that you can't fix. But having said that, you can live with it. And it's learning to live with that problem, learning to live with your neighbors, learning to live with that eyesore in the neighborhood, learning to accommodate the restrictions of whatever it is that's causing you to feel that it's not good for you. You learn to live with it. And healing takes place in that as well, generally, outwardly, not just for you as well. But I think this is also about teaching. Chiron is, after all, the teacher. So I wouldn't be surprised if this solar eclipse didn't make you aware of your role as a teacher. We can be teachers to our children, of course, but we can be teachers at school or university, or we can teach a skill or something. So this solar eclipse might be opening the door to you to become a teacher of some description. And I think that's a nice thing to think about in this way of a solar eclipse. Also, we've got Mars and Saturn in there. We've got Jupiter and Uranus in there. So it may be that financial situations, and we see that Mars-Saturn conjunction in the area of finance, that maybe it's through financial hardship that you have to diversify, Jupiter and Uranus, to get a new career or add to, your way of managing your finances. So the solar eclipse is going to be an opportunity to see how this can be done better, and how you can accommodate these things that seem to have been in your life, from time to time in rather a negative, difficult way. How can you, on this occasion, learn to manage it better and so make strides, accomplish growth? In many ways, Aquarius, wherever this solar eclipse may be in your natal chart, if you've got Aquarius rising, it's going to be in the third house, or at least the first degree of Aquarius rising is going to be in your third house. But if you've got some other sign rising, then the solar eclipse is going to be in another house, and it won't have quite the same kind of interpretation. But I still think there's an element here that says, you know what? You need a new mindset. You need to have a new outlook. on something, and by having a new outlook, a new mindset, so much of the things that you are stuck with in your life can really change, and change for the better. Right, and here we are with Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac, and certainly the last sign I'm going to look at on this video. And we look here at this solar eclipse taking place in the second house of self-worth. So it's not just about money and assets and the values that you have in life. It's also about your value as a person. So we could think of this solar eclipse as being a fantastic change, and suddenly your value changes. Other people hold you in a different light, so to speak, and they value you more because of events that happen to you. But it can work in reverse as well. And instead of having people highly regard you, and that affects the way they treat you, the way they pay you if you're an employee or you're a contractor, whatever it is, it's the other way around. And something changes, plunges you into a new kind of area of being, which makes you question your value. And of course, if this has to do with work and the way money reaches you and how you fund your life, if there's a change there, that can mean that you have to sort of rethink your whole kind of way of earning money, spending money, and all of that as well. So the eclipse can work both ways. It can bring you extra money. It can open up avenues for you to have a bigger platform, and to feel like you are super valued. But it can work the other way. But it's still the same lesson, isn't it? It's in a way, the lesson is know your value. Know what you are worth as a person, what your gifts are, who you are, and that it doesn't matter whether people pay you whatever they pay you. As long as you know your value is intact, that's all you need to know. So the lesson, if you like, in there is all about self-value and valuing yourself. And guess what? This eclipse is conjunct Chiron, so it's showing an area of life in which you may have felt you failed before. Now, is it that you've never had enough money to cover what you really need to do in life? Is it that you feel so often you are absolutely paid not what you deserve? So it may be something familiar, something that's come up before, and you try to get over it, you try to deal with it, but it doesn't make it any different. And of course, when it happens more than once and it becomes a pattern, it really does affect us deeply in our psyche, in our emotions, and how we run our life. It can be something that's a real impediment. So again, it comes back to the idea, look, I may not be able to change any of this. This is a result of the times we are living in, and these are times of shortages and cost of living and all of that. I can't change any of that. The only thing I can do is to learn how to manage my value, learn how to manage it, learn how to accept it in the first place, and then how to manage it better than before. Because often when we let those feelings of frustration and, especially when it's happened before, we really get upset that it's happened again. Throw all that out and say, yeah, it seems to have happened again. And there is a familiar sense to all of this, but it isn't exactly the same. It's different. And therefore, I can have a different outcome. And by learning to manage it in a way that I'm handling it, I'm going to get through the other side of this. That's the whole idea of the random events that a solar eclipse will bring in specific relation to finance and your sense of self. And of course, if you're a Pisces, and I'm talking to you now as a Pisces, remember, you could have a different sign rising. So this solar eclipse will be in a different part of your natal chart. Even so, it has a solar effect as well as it has the house that it is really in. But what I also want to look at here, Pisces, is that Mars and Saturn are conjunct in your sign. And I think particularly if you have a birthday around about the 2nd or 3rd of March, something like that, then this Saturn is right on your case at the moment. So you've got a Mars-Saturn conjunction at the same time as a solar eclipse conjunct Chiron. So this could be quite a difficult experience for you. You've got something happening that you're not really enjoying. But let's use those other images for Saturn that I've used on my videos for Saturn. We're looking at crystallization. We're looking at construction. We're looking at what we can create through this, as opposed to focusing on what we've lost, what we haven't got, what we can't do without, what we now have to do without. Instead of focusing on that, we need to think of the construction and crystallization that this conjunction brings, the strength it gives you, the staying power it gives you, the tenacity, the firmness of purpose, all of which is grist to your mill, Pisces. So the opportunities being brought about by this solar eclipse, which are out there, they're off the wall, you didn't expect them. Related to this Mars-Saturn conjunction is also the idea of, with tenacity, with firmness of purpose, there isn't anything you can't accomplish. And let's also look at the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the 3rd house, which is about an awakening. And it's an awakening that can prove life-changing because it changes your whole outlook. So a lot of things playing into this solar eclipse that are of great benefit to you, even if when you look at the events around the eclipse time, or the events, you will say, oh, this is my eclipse event. It came out of left field, and look what's happened. Ultimately, these are things of purpose to your journey. And by tackling it this way, rolling your sleeves up, head down, get on with it, you're going to come through the other side of that. All right, Pisces. So that is the zodiac finished completely. And it brings me really to my conclusion. And there was something that I meant to say a little bit earlier on in the overview, the beginning, and it was about the interplay of Chiron here and its implication in the solar eclipse, which I've just tried to do sign by sign and to give you generally a bit earlier on. One of the things I meant to say was this eclipse, because it is conjunct Chiron, is particularly important if you're 49, 50, or maybe getting into that 51st year of life. And why is that? It's because you're at the Chiron return. So this is a supremely important period of life. And while this video isn't really about Chiron, and I can always and may well do another video where I'll devote myself to this very important planetary object, celestial object, not a planet. The Chiron return is about often a realization of your true path, which is why so many people on a Chiron return decide they want to get into healing. Remember, Chiron was the healer, Chiron was the teacher. So they get into teaching and healing. And it's also this playing around with these themes, healing and teaching, that the Chiron return is such a powerful time to learn and heal. It doesn't mean cure. Heal is not curing. And often on a Chiron return, or even in association with this solar eclipse, we've got a wound, it's covered with scar tissue, but it reopens. That's another important consideration of this solar eclipse. And with the reopening of a wound, it is incredibly painful. And we must be prepared to go through that with whatever that represents in figurative terms. It's not necessarily literal. We've got a scar on our body and it reopens. May have to do with physical pain, but more than ever, or more than what I mean, is that it's figurative, and we're talking about the reopening of an old wound of some emotional, psychological origin. That's what we're looking at. So yes, this age group, 49, 50, 51, such an important time, such an important eclipse, epiphanies, awakenings, life changes, whatever sign of the zodiac it is, that age group is a very powerful period. And as I said, I will devote a little bit more time to that on another occasion. But I also want to talk about this all-important factor, again, related to the idea that the solar eclipse is conjunct Chiron. It's the understanding that we can't always fix things. And if you're a person who is a fixer, you have a problem and you like to fix it, then this solar eclipse is going to be a difficult one for you, because it's sort of showing you what you can't fix. And when I say what you can't fix, what can you do? You learn to live with it, or you learn to manage it, which is a better one. And I've talked about this virtually with every sign of the zodiac. In whatever area of life this is apparent, you can't necessarily fix it. It isn't, press this knob, turn that way, head back that way. It isn't like that. It's like, I can't fix this. But learning to manage it, and that is about material things as well. It can be a material, physical thing. You learn how to manage this situation in the physical world, in the real world, whether it's financial, physical, whatever it may be. But more important than that is your attitude to it. The minute you don't struggle to fix something, instead you struggle to learn from it and learn how best to handle it. That is such an active state. It's not passive, it's active without expectation. It's the expectation that gives us the pain. If we don't have the expectation, or we just manage it and feel a sense of accomplishment by management, we do well. And Chiron is essentially that process, the learning to manage it, the not learning the expectation of glory or cure or any of those things. Remember, I said healing is not curing. Healing is finding a way of soothing and managing pain or an existential wound. It's not curing it. And that's what we have to acknowledge, all of us, with whatever experience tied into this eclipse, Chiron, massive conjunction for all of us. And of course, it's collective as well. So I had a note here. No, that note I'm not going to refer to, actually, because I think in a funny kind of way, I've said everything there is to say about this. We are now in the wake of this eclipse, and we await to see what it tells us about life on planet Earth as being a human at this time, global events, as well, of course, as our own individual story. Thank you for being with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.